Hello, in this video I want to continue the conversation that we've been having about Black Marxism and water. If you haven't, you should definitely check out the last the last two videos that I did. Because it's a really good intro for the video that I'll be doing here because they're directly made off of the last two videos. So if you haven't, this is definitely the point where you should go back and watch the intro to Black Marxism and Water or Black Marxism and Water Part 1, because those both kind of introduce the idea of just talking about what I think about this criticism on the resolution as a whole, why I think it's a good argument on the resolution, why I think it covers a lot of bases, and the ways that I think it can be used on the affirmative and negative. But it also is a good intro to what I think are some of the main priorities and what are some of the kind of framing and thesis questions for what I'll be talking about in this video particularly, which are the uses of Black Marxism on the negative versus policy teams, which I think will be one of the most common places that you'll see this argument used. I think it's also the place where this argument can be one of the most poignant, because I think there are a lot of ways in which you can definitely use this type of criticism in order to really beat down a lot of affirmatives that I think really want to kind of like use this kind of like capitalism angle on their type of affirmative and really turn it against them. I think with really intuitive arguments about the relationship between the government, capitalism, and private markets and private corporations, which I think can be really interesting places for you to build offense out of in order to make core critical arguments on the resolution as a whole. And then I'll kind of be talking about in this video as we finish off that section of videos. The first place that I kind of want to talk about for this particular video is the link debate. I think that the link debate can be a really interesting place for how you want to beat down policy teams. I think that against teams that are directly trying to talk about capitalism and racism in the context of the resolution but are still reading a plain text, I think there are a lot of interesting arguments you can make about the way in which just like the idea of sovereignty or governmentality as a whole is an investment in capitalism, that the state is always capitalist because it is like made off of and can profit and only maintain its existence off of like capitalism, that it requires that in order to like create the budgets, its ability to manage and infiltrate and create and like execute law. And I think that being able to make such a deep critique of the relationship between capitalism and the state can, against a lot of affirmatives that are attempting to really address this question head on, really at the question with some of the core values that they're trying to push as places of like link turns and offense, and can really force a really clean kind of impact turn debate about the role of the state in various types of organizing. And I think there's such a deep entrenched history of various black radicals talking about the possibility of black anarchism and at least the kind of like stigmatization of the state as inevitably capitalist. And I think that those types of criticisms are a place where Black Marxism can really pull from a wide range of resistance strategies in order to really have a legitimate kind of like feeling of what these kind of like link arguments evolve into. And I think arguments that obviously pivot away from that and are more meant in order to resolve like things like keeping the economy stable in order to kind of like preserve and make possible the ending of things like warfare, etc., and also ones that are just meant to kind of like resolve the key environmentalism debate. I think there are so many arguments to be made about various types of organizing structures that black people have taken up historically. Things like organizing structures that exist now, from Cooperation Jackson all the way to like when the Black Panther parties were doing various types of redistribution programs, what things could look like when we think about organizing resources differently across different types of organizational bases that black radicals have kind of taken up throughout history. And I think that kind of citing those as places in which there can kind of be a direct impact turn debate about the efficacy or the efficiency of the type of strategies that the affirmative is proposing in order to resolve the environment, as ones that basically require the continued usage of the environment as a resource, which necessitates an investment of resource development from the lens of capitalism, which I think is really easy to kind of like problematize from the lens of this criticism. And I think is a really good place to invest time in order to really make a strong criticism on the resolution as a whole. I think that the link arguments definitely set up a lot of ways for you to be able to both spin into arguments about why the particular mechanism, type of skills, and like policy planning that the affirmative is taking up require an investment into ways of thinking about and learning about the resolution in ways that are investments in neoliberalism and ways of using debate in a really neoliberal way. But I also think that you have really legitimate link arguments to why the particular types of like mechanisms and decisions that the team is making politically have material consequences that don't actually involve a radical redistribution or changing some of the foundational values of how the state is kind of operating and thinking about the relationship that water has to various sources of structural injustice. I think that then when you kind of like take this and apply it to how you're thinking about things like the permutation, you have a lot of arguments to be made about why the kind of like central tenets of the affirmative are not compatible with the alternative in the way in which the alternative cease to organize, and why the alternative can only have a relationship with the affirmative alternative that requires the basically thinking about the state in such a way that basically requires a constant refusal of it as something that can like retrieve or produce some type of radical redistribution in the name of like something more just. And I think that that kind of like position is where you really want a lot of alternatives to sit in, because I think the harder line you can kind of draw with this type of criticism, the easier it is for the judge to really identify and digest the points of offense that you're taking in, and the easier I think it also is in order for you to make really intuitive and nuanced dissents that aren't just based off of viewing whether or not the state is inherently capitalist, but are more based on why like a functional and historical basis the kind of relationship that the alternative has had to the state has been one in which the state has attempted to produce some type of like basically destruction of resistance towards the way in which especially black radicals have attempted to think about alternative types of organizational structures and redistributive structures alternative to the ones that the state kind of bestows as legitimate or sees as like within sovereign capacity. That means when you go into the impact comparison debate, I think that you do have a really interesting way to really interact with a lot more of the materiality debate and push why the kind of inevitable serial policy failure of the affirmative from its investment of the state in such a way kind of makes it impossible to think about actually resolving environmental crises. And in that context, you're really raising a lot of questions for the impact comparison in a really material sense to be responded to by the types of claim and organizing firm that you want the alternative to take up. And even if you're not winning that, like the alternative as like a strategy rhetorically is able to lead to like a material change in the world, the idea of using debate as a place to think about what types of political strategies, tactics, and planning we should be taking up in response to these types of crises, I think is a really good way for you to situate like the net benefits of the alternative while still accessing kind of all the historical weight and examples that you kind of want to situate a lot of your arguments in. That I think is overall a really comfortable place for you to have the debate, because I think that it allows you to really like have the kind of like debates about the merits and the materiality of the debate while still having a lot of these top level kind of like meta indites of like the very way in which they're thinking about the role that policy plays and the way it kind of like is inevitably and innately tied to like the investment into a kind of like neoliberal force that situates like the current relationship between like privatized companies and like the way in which they're thinking about their position for water productions in relationship to the U.S.'s kind of like responsibility to the public, to those corporations, etc., etc. Hopefully this video was helpful in order to shape a lot of the things I'm thinking about for how this kind of argument will shape up against policy teams on the resolution, and hopefully you'll tune in for more that I'll be doing. And yeah, thanks.